Hello guys and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me Vulcan. Today I have for you a battle group overview of the 12th SS-Panzer Division, and in this one I'm going to be talking through the units of each type and how they complement each other just like I have done previously. Now the SS-Panzer is probably my favourite division. I can't say however that my deck is perfect or that this isn't necessarily the most optimal deck. I'm just going to be talking through the units and which units I think are good and the reasons why. And if you agree with that, then great. If you don't, then feel free to put your comments in the comment section below. So let's get this started with the Recon tab. I'm going to be starting off by taking the Sperrtrupp. Now these are just a 4-man infantry recon squad. They come in the half-track, which is the 251 variant, with the 2 machine guns. I don't believe they can both fire at the same time unless there's a unit in front and behind it. But either way, a decent half-track to be supporting your infantry, and that's what you'd use it for after dropping off the recon squad. You don't generally want to get this recon squad into combat. It doesn't have any veterancy, although it does have a machine gun, so it can provide fire support if you need it to. And that's basically it. I would recommend possibly bringing these in the Kubel. I just like having the extra half track to use for an extra 15 points. So that's why I bring in the 251 rather than the Kubel. Next up, we have the Aufklärer in the 222s. Now these 222s are amazing. The recon infantry, just leave them behind in a place where they're going to provide decent recon. Put them on return fire, don't really worry about them. But the 222, this is what you're going to be bringing in this recon squad for. It has the 4 AP power on the main gun, along with the 9 HE power on the cannon, with the 7 HE power on the machine gun. Absolutely amazing at tearing through infantry. Really good fire support for your own infantry. And it does have 2 front, side and rear armor, which is great as well. So it's basically immune to light arms fire. Although don't let it get too close to enemy infantry because it's technically open top and therefore can be destroyed by grenades. So just be wary about that, but otherwise fantastic fire support. Definitely a unit I would recommend bringing in. Next up in Phase B we have the SPW-231. This is a fantastic recon vehicle in Phase B if the enemy don't have too much heavy armor or medium armor. Basically, it's great for running down enemy infantry as well as providing the extra recon. So one thing that I would tend to use this for is if I've got a good start on the game, use this to back up my half tracks and APCs that I already have on the field. Just provide the extra recon, like I said, as well as the extra fire support. It has a similar setup to the 222 in terms of its weapons, and same with its armor, except for it has 3 front armor. It is a vehicle with high optics and it is relatively fast. So yeah, great vehicle all round. Really nice recon. Bring in mid game, and I've got another card of those in Phase C to bring in another 4 of them. Now I don't bring in the 233s generally because I find the 6 AP is not that great. I'd much rather just have an auto cannon with the 4 AP, and these things can basically do the same job. The SPW-231 just needs to be a bit closer for anything armoured, and generally that's quite easy to do with line of sight if you use line of sight efficiently and effectively. So yeah, 233s in my opinion aren't really worth bringing in, so I just bring in 231s. Moving on to the infantry, we have Panzergrenadier. Definitely ideal to have some command infantry. I only have 1 card of command infantry in this deck. And the reason for that is because you just want to keep them alive. You don't use them to fight. Don't use them to fight at all. Just use them and keep them alive for the majority of the game. If they get in trouble, use their smoke grenades to, cover them off. And then that will allow them to stay alive, continue to give their veterancy to units around them. And they just come in the Kubel. You can't get them in anything else. So yeah, just the Panzergrenadier in Phase A, 2-star veterancy, relatively nice. You can get some more in Phase B in the half tracks. And you can also get the Pioneer Führer in Phase B as well. But just 4-man squads for that 22 AP power grenade. I mean, you're not really going to be using that grenade very often, let's be honest. So, yeah, no point in really bringing in the Pioneer Führer later on. Maybe the Panzergrenadier for 35 points in Phase B, but for 15 points in Phase A, you can't really go wrong. Now we have the Panzer Grenadiers. I have 3 cards of Panzer Grenadiers in the half tracks. Some people like to mix it up, bring them in Opel Blitzes, just to allow them to get to the front line quicker. You can see they have the 88 km/h speed on road. That's the Opel Blitz, and then the half track is only, what, 70 km/h on road. So yeah, it allows you to get to the front line a little bit quicker at the start of the game, and it is obviously cheaper. You can get multiple units of these Panzer Grenadiers. I would say this is more of a strategy for like a 1v1 and a 2v2. If you bring in EP units, you can obviously have more of them at the start, and that definitely gives you more presence across the map early on. However, I much prefer just using them in combination with these half tracks, just because the half tracks can be so good and very, very useful. So yeah, I just like using half track support. So 3 units of Panzer Grenadiers. I don't bring in Pioneers, even though you can bring in more of them. I've just got a couple of the squads of them in Phase B with the half tracks. I could probably swap one of those out for the Opel Blitz just to get more of them. That's probably actually quite a nice idea. But in my deck so far, I just like to have all of the half tracks where I can, because I find half tracks incredibly useful. And then furthermore to that, we have the MG42 squad in Phase B, again with half tracks. Half tracks, too good to miss out on. And it basically, this MG42, it has 9 HE power, very, very strong machine gun. The machine gun on the half track is an MG42 as well, with 7 HE power, but this basically provides machine gun fire support for the rest of your infantry, which is why I find them so important in this deck. Again, you can choose to bring them in the Opel Blitzes if you want mobility and also more availability in Phase B. As for the other units, I don't bring in Sturm Pioneers. Again, 6-man squads, 100-meter range on the flamethrower. I'm not particularly keen on these. They're great in certain situations, but for this deck, I feel like you need more of the all-rounder like kind of units, as opposed to just the Sturm Pioneers. Like, I'd much rather use Pioneers with the 22 AP power grenade than the flamethrower, because those 22 AP power grenades can literally one-shot enemy squads. So yeah, anyway, moving on to the tanks, we have the BEF Panzer II in Phase A. Now this is actually pretty important. It's a very good complementary unit to your fire support in the early game. So get that recon vehicle, the 231 and the 222, and you couple it up with the Panzer II. Not only do you get the Panzer II gives them more veterancy, but the Panzer II also provides its own fire support. So for a P9HE, great at tearing apart infantry. Again, same setup as the 222 and the 231. Just it has more front armor, slightly slower, but provides the extra veterancy surrounding it, which is great. I would always recommend bringing in the Bow Firefly on this deck, not necessarily at the start of the game. I wouldn't recommend bringing in the Firefly at the start, mainly due to the fact that if you get it destroyed, that's 200 points down the drain that the enemy can exploit so easily. So you have to be very careful. This is sort of the unit that if you find your opponent using a lot of heavier armor, like M4A1s for example, then a Firefly will deal with those nicely. Then you bring it in. I also have, moving on to Phase B, the BEF Panzer IV. This is a 2-star Panzer IV, very nice and accurate. Then it has the 2-star veterancy. It does buff the veterancy of surrounding units, which is why I have it, and that's basically to complement the Panther Ds that I'll be bringing in Phase B. So in Phase B you can't get any up-vetted Panther Ds, but the Panther Ds are always better, in my opinion, than bringing in more Panzer IVs, even if you can get up-vetted Panzer IVs. So Panther Ds, 2 cards of those, get 4 of them in Phase B. Sometimes you manage to use them all. It depends how many points you're saving to use them, and also depends on the map as well, because in a map where it's more open you'll be using more Panther Ds, otherwise you'll be using less of them. They do have 2 machine guns, a turret mounted coaxial machine gun, and a machine gun on the top, which is mounted by the commander. So they do provide that MG support as well, which is quite nice. Now, you can kind of go for the Panzer 4AHs if you like. You will get them 2-star veterancy if you're using them with a Panzer 4, but only really good against light armor from the American side of things. And you're always vulnerable to be penetrated with those units, so generally something I wouldn't recommend. Whereas a Panther D with 12 front armor, 12 front armor is like 1 higher than the AP value of most of the Shermans, so it shouldn't be able to be penetrated very easily unless you let them get close. Now moving on to Phase C, I just take 3 cards of the BEF Panthers because they all come 2-star veterancy and they all have 14 front armor, as you can see. The 14 front armor makes quite a lot of difference, especially when it comes to jumbos and so on. The Panther Gs are the same price and they have 13 armor. Now the reason you would take Panther Gs in this case is for availability. So if you are finding in Phase C you are running out of Panthers, which I don't think you'll find you are, then taking more Panther Gs in your deck, the 1-star variants, is probably a good idea because they will be buffed up by the BF Panther. So you could take 2 cards of BF Panthers and 1 card of Panther Gs, and then have that to add to your arsenal an extra Panther, right? But again, you're sacrificing 1 front armor, and you're losing out on veterancy as well. Whereas the BEF Panther, with the coaxial and the hull-mounted and the commander machine gun, they tear apart infantry, and they are snipers without having to provide an extra command tank to give them the extra veterancy. So overall, unless you're running out of Panthers, bring in the BF Panther. Moving on to supports. Well, support's an interesting one. I find that this is probably one of the tabs that varies quite a lot between people that I know who play the game. Some people like to bring in the SPW223 because it's a 2-star vetted machine gun carrier, which is actually quite nice for pinning down enemy infantry and also providing the extra command radius to troops surrounding with the extra veterancy. So that's really nice, and I can understand why people would take the 223, but in my opinion, the primary vehicle on this tab is the 259. Now this is, again, the same autocannon setup as the 222 and the 231 from the Recon tab. However, it's only 35 points and it does have 2 front armor still. It's not very vulnerable to light arms fire unless you let it get too close to enemy infantry, and can pin down enemy infantry very easily. So use these alongside your half tracks to absolutely wreck enemy infantry. The only thing that really can counter these is like M5A1s from the 3rd Armoured and other like strong AP light tanks from Phase A. So, you know, like an M4A1 for example might be a problem for this 259. However, if you get these close enough, they can still blow them up. You just need to use line of sight again to get them closer, and also you probably need to flank them and shoot enemy tanks in the side armor as opposed to the front armor. Otherwise you're probably not going to get very far. But either way, definitely a very nice vehicle that I like to bring in. Some people like to bring in the 258, which is the HE variant. It works a lot like the Scott from the 3rd Armoured. It does do very well against enemy infantry and is great fire support. However, it does suffer against enemy vehicles with AP, whereas the 259 can generally defend itself against other vehicles, light vehicles with AP values, like the Humber, for example, from the 17th Scots Division. Now, I've also got the Cromwell in this deck. I would say that this is probably one of the most important vehicles on this deck. It comes with 13 HE power, main gun, with 1,200 meter range, which is the main benefit of this tank. So you can fire out of range of most Phase A enemy AT guns. So most Phase A enemy AT guns on the ally sides are 1,000 meter range. Beau Cromwell has the 1,200 meter range. You can fire position at places where you know there is an AT gun and probably destroy them. So that's a fantastic way to use this tank. Moving on, we have the SPW232. I absolutely love this. I've really started to bring this in as opposed to the recon variant of the 231. 232 is a command vehicle which provides extra veterancy to units surrounding it. It has 2-star veterancy plus the auto cannon setup. So 4 AP power, 9 HE power on the main gun, and then the 7 HE power on the machine gun. And this can rip to shreds infantry very quickly because of its veterancy and accuracy because of that. Moving on, I did miss out getting the Opel Blitzes in Phase A. I don't find you need any more munitions than one sort of card. So generally I just bring in the 2 trucks and that's fine for the rest of the game. Don't tend to use more than that unless I'm spamming artillery, which I never do. So unless you're a heavy artillery user, you might want to bring in a second card of Opel Blitzes in Phase B, but Phase A is definitely important to have the munitions for resupplying machine guns specifically. Some people like to bring in the Flampanzer 251-16, but personally this is not really a unit that I like to use. It does have the 12 HE power napalm, which is very strong against enemy infantry, and if you can keep them out of range of the bazookas, it will work out very nicely for you. So in close combat this can be an extremely useful support vehicle, and I can see why people would bring it. However, in my opinion, I use other fire support like the autocannon units. Now the grill is another unit that I like to see used. However, not really my personal preference. It does have a 27 HE main gun, very close to like the AVRE for example. However, it doesn't have the armor. It's a 1,000 meter range. It's a direct fire unit. It's not artillery. It looks very much like artillery, but it's a direct fire unit in this game that uses a 27 HE power to one-shot enemy infantry, and also can blow up some quite heavily armored units up to probably about 7, 8, even 9 armor sometimes if you get the shot in the right place. Like if you land the HE shell just behind like a tank for example, you can blow it up with its low rear armor. But yeah, I'm not really a fan of the grill. I don't tend to bring it in very often. Haven't really tried it out personally, but I've seen people use it to great effect. So definitely something to consider. And you could possibly replace this with maybe the 232 or even the 259s if you don't want to use them in Phase A. Moving on to anti-tank, I bring in 2 Pak 38s with the 50mm gun in Phase A. These are the 1-star veterancy, just to make them a little bit more accurate, tends to make them a bit more useful. You can obviously opt for more availability if you're finding that you're struggling to cover the entire front with AT guns in Phase A. I would also possibly recommend bringing in the Panzerschreck with the 3 Panzerschrecks with the half tracks in Phase A, but I choose to bring them in Phase B because I tend to find that they are a lot more situational units. Generally with these Panzerschrecks is they are great for dealing with the 17th Scots Division. I believe is it the 17th? No, it's not the 17th at all. But either way, the Scots Division, they are great for dealing with the Scots Division, and therefore you could bring in some of them in Phase A to deal with them. However, in Phase B you get 4 of them, and again, situational 70 points cost, which is why I don't tend to bring them in early on. They do have 5 AP power and the 3 HE power on the APC with that like gun on the front of it, as well as the machine gun, which is fantastic. And then the Panzerfaust unit at close range can pretty much penetrate anything that's in range. So really, really good unit to use. As for another AT gun in Phase B, I've got the Pak 40 75mm. This is moving up to 15 AP power, a lot stronger against the allied armor, and generally once these things get on target they tend to penetrate quite often. So very, very useful AT gun. And then it comes with the quite a slow sort of vehicle with it, but it's generally much better off-road than other vehicles because it does have this tracks, so that's great. So this can be moved around quite easily, although obviously once you drop it off, the vehicle disappears. As for the Jagdpanzer 4s, you're probably wondering why I don't bring these in. The Jagdpanzers can be extremely useful. They do have 14 front armor and 12 AP power, which is more than enough to penetrate most allied armor. And their 14 front armor is also enough to bounce most allied armor. And the 2-star does make them very accurate. However, when you come to Phase B, I'd much rather be spending my points on Panthers with 18 AP power than the anti-tank with 12 AP power. So that's just tends to be why I've taken AT guns and Panzerschrecks in this deck as opposed to Jagdpanzers, because I bring in the tanks to provide anti-tank support as opposed to the Jagdpanzers themselves. That's pretty much it. I'd much rather have these AT guns that can be concealed and can be very useful in certain situations. The only thing that I would change about this tab is possibly moving the Panzerschrecks to Phase A rather than Phase B. So that's the only thing that I would possibly recommend, and if you like the Jagdpanzers, then try them out and use them. There's no reason why you shouldn't. As for anti-air, I bring in the half-track with the 20mm autocannon on it, rather than the Flak 38s separately. Basically, this is the half-track variant of the Flak 38, but just on wheels. I'm bringing that in Phase B. I don't have any AA in Phase A for this deck, mainly because I don't find that the AA in Phase A is effective enough to stop airstrikes from happening, so why buy it in the first place, right? Whereas when you come to Phase B and you can get 3 of these fellas, they can actually start to do a bit of damage and start to definitely deter enemy AA. When it comes to Phase C, that's generally when people have bought all of their AA or all of their Air Force. So I've got the card of 3 verbal winds and the 2 cards of Flak 88s. These Flak 41 88mm cannons are absolutely fantastic, both for shooting down aircraft and for killing enemy tanks. So you can use them as AT as opposed to just AA. You have a strength of 10, which makes them quite resilient, and they do come with a half track that does have a machine gun on it, so that's great as well, and you can use that to reposition them quickly as well. So that's quite nice. Other things that you might be able to consider in this deck is possibly just, using the ground-based AA, the non-mobile AA. For example, the Flak 37mm does have 9 HE, quite good for stopping enemy strikes from happening in the first place, great for stunning enemy aircraft. The verbal winds are very good, however, because they have the really fast fire rate 12 HE guns. That's why I love to use them in Phase C. You could use the mobile wagons, but the only benefit really of these compared to the verbal wind is the range. But the verbal wind always has more rate of fire, so as soon as they come into the line of sight of the verbal wind, you're generally in a good place. And 2 Flak 88s with the 1200 meter range, these things can stun units. Once you bring them both in, and I would recommend you bring them both in at the same time, they will basically 2-shot fall back like enemy aircraft most of the time. Depends on the aircraft really, but yeah, generally a very effective strategy for dealing with anti-air in Phase C. I'm moving on to artillery. I'm bringing the 2 mortar carriers in Phase A. These are the 10 HE power mortar carriers. Very similar to the 3rd Armoured. This is the same reason I bring in these mortar carriers. 10 HE is very strong in the early game, and I do bring in 2 of them. They are 1 card each, which is quite a lot to invest, but generally I think it's worth it. You can wait and bring in 2 more in Phase B possibly. This is a mortar carrier that comes with a machine gun, and it is 95 points. Again, possibly you could switch out a Phase A mortar for 2 more in Phase B, but generally I find that I'm using both in Phase A most of the time. When it comes to the rocket artillery, a lot of people like to challenge what I do with this deck. Panzerwerfers are great, and some people prefer to bring in multiple of them and maybe have 3 cards of Panzerwerfers, and that's all they would use for artillery for most of the game. But I've recently been trying out the Werframen 40 with the 30 HE power. Very similar to the Nebelwerfers, and definitely a very strong unit. Does have quite a lot of dispersion, but great solid range with a solid HE power. Really nice weapon for basically destroying enemy AT positions, enemy infantry that's trying to attack you in certain places. If you're planning to attack a town, this is a fantastic vehicle to use to bombard the enemy before you move in. So it does have the napalm effect as well, I believe, so that's great. Same with the Panzerwerfer. Panzerwerfer just benefits from having a larger range, a little bit less HE power, and also it reloads quicker because it has more ammunition, I believe. Some people like to use the Hummel with a 27 HE power, 2,800 meter range. Definitely a decent AT weapon in Phase C. I just love the shock and awe of the Werframen though, and in Phase B you could take the Wesp, but generally 15 HE power long range artillery isn't super effective. Now a lot of people ask me about the Panzer IV with the off-map artillery. Now the off-map artillery for this one is 18 HE power. It's a 173mm field battery gun with a 56mm or 56 meter splash area of effect. It's a relatively good field battery, and this tank is definitely one that is good value for money. However, the main issue with it is it's a non-vetted Panzer IV, and by Phase C, which is the time you bring it in, this tank is generally outclassed by anything that it's put up against, which is why I wouldn't tend to bring it in late game. And it's not a vehicle that you would bring in solely for its artillery either. But if this was like, you could get one of these in Phase B, that would be fantastic. But the fact that you can get it in Phase C is a little bit on the reason why I don't bring it in very often or at all. I have been sort of juggling between having it in my deck and not. Most of the time I find that I just don't bring it in the end. The suggestions for this tab really are, if you like long range heavy HE artillery, Hummels are great. If you love shock and awe, then the Werframen is fantastic. The Panzerwerfer almost fills the same role. Definitely has more ammunition. I think it can fire 2 salvos before it runs out of ammunition, which is fantastic, and it's only 110 points. So a great rocket artillery piece for like stunning enemy units. Not necessarily going to destroy so much as the Werframen, but definitely good. And obviously it fires 10 rockets at once, which is fantastic. Panzer IV, up to you. If you feel like you're going to use it, then definitely bring it in. It's a great value for money. Just make sure you use the Panzer IV effectively to make it worth it. Alright, moving on to the air tab. My air tab's very small. A lot of people like to bring in the bombers, but I don't tend to. I've just used the air tab on this for basically holding the skies, a lot like I did with the 3rd Armoured. I've got the ME-109s, G6R6s. Got 2 cards of, or like the card of 2 for Phase B, just to shoot down enemy aircraft, to help out with dealing with the skies. And then I've got the ME-109 G2 with the big old 210mm rocket pods, the 25 HE power. These are invaluable at taking out enemy AT positions, and also just like important units like command infantry, and also just like general infantry squads that are pushing you in positions that you aren't easily able to defend with other units. So like a strike from one of these is great. Furthermore, they're great for stunning tanks, and just they're so versatile that it's definitely worth having a card of these. Furthermore, they can shoot down enemy aircraft if they let you. I mean, they are only 500 km/h speed, but they do have very good agility, which is fantastic. Same with the ME-109, very good agility. They just come with an extra couple of guns on them, which is what makes them so much more effective against enemy fighters. I was playing around with having just one BF-109, but I just found that I didn't have enough of them, as opposed to the 2 you can get with the other card. So just getting rid of the experience, you can bring in 2 of them, which I think is more worth it. Some people enjoy bringing in the FW190s with the extra bombs. These FW190 G1s, they have 500 km/h speed still, and they come with a bomb, the 500 kilogram bomb. Can be very, very useful. These ones, the G3s, they have more speed, good against shooting down enemy aircraft, but they don't have as good agility. And also those 4 50 kilogram bombs are pretty much useless. They barely ever do anything. So yeah, if you're going to bring in an FW190, bring in the G1 as opposed to the G3. Definitely a choice that you could maybe switch out for my ME109s, G6R6s, or even the ME109 G2 if you don't like using rockets, but I don't see why you wouldn't because they are very, very strong. As for the JU88, you could definitely bring in one of these, but if you don't have the escort, then you're going to be struggling to use them effectively, and they're most likely to get shot down by enemy fighters if you aren't supporting them properly. So yeah, that's pretty much the air tab. If you guys have any more questions, then leave them in the comments. I don't bring in recon aircraft. They generally just get shot down very easily, and they don't actually provide you that much more information than other units. Anything in forest, for example, will still remain hidden because of the line of sight of the forest. So there you go. Unless you're flying right over the top of it, you're generally not going to see anything, and therefore it's not really worth bringing them in, especially for 85 points. Doesn't really provide you with much. Either way, that's all for this deck. Let's just quickly go over some of the complementary units across the board. This is a pretty long video, so I'm sorry it's dragged on quite a bit, but either way, yeah, the SPW 231s, fantastic for supporting your troops for recon once you brought in the 222s with the Aufklärer. And also you have the Beau Cromwell in Phase 8, fantastic for shooting enemy AT guns. But the best thing that I like to do at the start of the game is a Panzer II with 2 of the 259s, plus the 222s dropped off from the Aufklärer. Then you bring in like 1 Panzer Grenadier with 1 Panzer Grenadier on each part of the map that you want to take. So each tactical place on the map that you identify, you send a Panzer Grenadier squad there with a Panzer Grenadier, use a half-track for support. And then wherever you want to push, you use the Panzer II with the 259s and the 222s. If they basically counter you with anything heavier, then you bring in the Firefly to basically kill off that heavier armor, and then you can continue to push with your lighter vehicles. And then when it moves into Phase B, if you're again up against heavier armor, bring in Panther Ds, and if it's open, obviously Panther Ds. If it's not, you can go for like the 232, for example, along with the 231s. Fantastic combination for smashing through enemy infantry and light armor. Would definitely recommend bringing in at least 1 mortar carrier early on, and also bringing in your AT guns, pretty important against enemy armor again. So instead of bringing in like a Firefly, sorry, for 200 points, you bring in 2 AT guns. They can generally take care of M4A1s if they get in line of sight, and then you can run around them with the Panzer IIs and the 259s. That's what I like to do with this deck. Use it as a very much mechanized deck. You can push on very hard into enemy and exploit like light armor and so on. Use your infantry to reveal targets for your autocannon units, and you should be grand. If you get bogged down, use Panzerwerfers and Werflammens. If you're being targeted by a lot of air units, bring in the Flak 88s in Phase C. If it's a bit early, then you can bring in all 3 of the 251-17s with the 20mm autocannons. Should cover you off quite nicely. And again, moving into the late game, BF Panthers gonna snipe any tanks that you come up against at the moment. So yeah, there you go. That's basically my look at the SS-Panzer. Hopefully you guys have learned something from this video, or just enjoy looking at my decks and comparing them to your own. That's fair enough. I will probably continue to make changes to this deck as I continue to play, of course. This is not an optimal deck. I just want to put that out there. This is not what I'm saying is perfect. I know that you guys have your own opinions, and obviously things, of course, like I said, will change in the future. especially like unit statistics and so on. So decks or units that would have been used before might not be used in the future because of balancing changes. So just bear that in mind. But either way, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.